Hello, thank you for watching my channel today. My name's Sarah and my channel is called Your True Self. Today I'm doing a wrap up. I did a wrap up kind of halfway through March last, and so I've got some March books to wrap up. I've got loads of books in April, so I will see how the time goes, whether I wrap up all of those books or whether I just wrap up some of those books and save some for later. So I had a really good reading month. I guess I've been spurred on by reading as many as I can from the Women's Prize long list, and we find out the shortlist next week. I think it's on Wednesday, which I'm really excited about because there are some which I know I'm not going to read, but I really would like to read the whole shortlist. I'm hoping the ones I've read so far will be on the shortlist so that I've nearly done it. But anyhow, let's just crack on. So the first book I have to talk about is one that I listened to on Audible, and this was from the Women's Prize long list, and this was The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley. This book is absolutely phenomenal. I love this book so much, and I'm almost 100% sure, or I am 100% sure it will be on my best books of the year list because I loved it. So this is a book where we're following Elle, who is our protagonist, and when the book starts, she has just had sex with this man called Jonas, who she has known since she was a little girl, and that's just happened, and then we go back to the beginning of that day, and hour by hour we go through the day to see how it led up to that. But at the same time, we also go back to her childhood, and we follow her from childhood, and in parts even her mum's childhood, all the way up to present day as well. So there's two different timelines going on, but both leading up to the same thing. And so Elle is married to a man called Peter. She's happily married, and she has 3 children. And Jonas, who's the man she had sex with, he is also married, but he doesn't have any children. And so they have to decide, like, what's going to happen next. It's set in Cape Cod, where both families have been going every summer since childhood, and that's how Elle and Jonas met each other. And so we see them interacting with their families and also interacting with each other as well. And there's a lot of theme of water, so there's a lot of kind of swimming and different sort of water-based themes in the book as well. There is, in the childhood bit, there is some quite traumatic stuff to read. So there's sexual abuse which happens in the family. So that is obviously a big trigger warning. But I loved how Elle is happily married, but there's also this kind of great love of her life, Jonas, who she hasn't married as well, and what to do. And it's just the most phenomenal, beautiful, magical, wonderful story, and I just cannot recommend it highly enough. So that one is a big old 5 stars for me. The second one I read was also from the Women's Prize long list, and this is Remote Sympathy by Catherine Chidgey. I haven't actually seen anyone talk about this book yet, I don't think. So this is a book which is set in Germany and World War II, and we're hearing from 3 different viewpoints. So the first one is Greta Hahn, the second is her husband Dietrich Hahn, and the third is a Dr. Weber. And Greta and Dietrich are living in a sort of quite an opulent lifestyle in, I think it's like Berlin, maybe? Is it Berlin? Let me just have a quick check. Munich. They're in Munich. And then they go to a different place because Dietrich has got a job as an officer in the SS, and he is going to be working at Buchenwald concentration camp, and they are living just outside the grounds, and they have a little boy. And there's this kind of, because we're hearing from these perspectives, we're hearing the husband's perspective is after the war has finished, and he's obviously being interviewed by a journalist about what he did in the war, and he's very much like defending the German point of view and how actually it wasn't all that bad, and how yes, they did so many things to look after the prisoners, and all of this kind of thing. But then we're also hearing from Dietrich no, sorry, that's the husband. We're also hearing from Dr. Weber. So he is married to a Jewish woman, and he's working as a doctor, and he is trying to invent a machine to cure a disease, and that's how he gets brought into the story, because his machine is needed by the Hahn family, and he is sent to Buchenwald so that he is close to the family. So we hear from the prisoner's point of view, and we also hear from the wife's point of view, and the sort of the villagers, about how they kind of know what's going on, but they're also kind of also turning a blind eye as well. So I don't think I've read anything which is set from the SS point of view before. So I think it was like a brave book to write and an interesting book to write. I really did think it was great. I gave it 4 stars just because not every single part of the book engaged me, but the writing was wonderful. It really evoked time and place, and I think in retrospect I'd give it 4.5 stars. So yeah, I'd be really happy if this was on the shortlist as well. The third book I read was another one from the Women's Prize longlist, and this was Careless, and this is a book which some people are saying is YA. I'm not sure if it's definitely YA or not, but it's basically following our protagonist, whose name I have forgotten, and she is at the very start, she is finding out that she is pregnant, and she is 16, and she is in foster care, and she doesn't really get on at all with her foster mum. It's a long-term placement, so she's been with them for years, but the foster mum and dad have a biological child as well, who is very much favoured by the mum. And so this is by Kirsty Capes, and she actually, I believe, is a care leaver herself, and she wanted to focus on stories of young people in care, which I think is really important because we don't hear about many people in care. The only book I can think of is My Name is Leon. And anyway, so she finds out she's pregnant. She has been sleeping with this boy who is called Boy in the story, but he's kind of a complete waste of space basically, and she doesn't know what to do, and it's basically, excuse the Christmas mug, my husband's made me a cup of tea and used a Christmas mug, and she's basically trying to figure out what the heck she's going to do, who she's going to tell, how it's going to impact her life, how to, like, about the relationship with her stepmom and her foster mum, and what her foster mum wants her to do, and I thought it was really well done, but I think I gave it 4 stars. I think it was not one of my favourites, but I think it raised some really important issues. In retrospect, this might be a 3.5 stars. The next one I read wasn't on the list, so this was one that I finished off. It was an essay collection that I finished on my Kindle, and it was Too Fat, Too Slutty, Too Loud by Helen Petersen. So, and this was subtitled The Rise of the Unruly Women. So this is basically picking celebrity women who have been deemed to something, and then unpicking the judgment and stereotypes from the media. And I found some of these essays really good. So my favourite one was about Serena Williams, which was dubbed Too Strong, and it was just shocking, the amount of commentary and discussion about Serena Williams' body was absolutely shocking. Like, some of the quotes that she's quoted from different newspapers and magazines and stuff were unbelievable. Like, my mouth was literally like falling open at some of the things that she's had to put up with. So that was my favourite essay. There was some where I felt like she was very keen on making a certain argument, and she would sort of ignore anything to the contrary, so and kind of twist opinions a little bit, which I found a little bit like one-sided sometimes. A few of the celebrities I'd never heard of, so I had to Google who they actually were. So I gave this 3 stars. I think some of the essays were really interesting, but other ones were kind of just average for me. I then read our book club choice for work. So the pick for April was Pine by Francine Toon. So I was glad this got picked because this has been on my TBR for quite a long time. So it's nice to actually read it because I think it would have been sat there for a long time longer as well. This was kind of average for me. So This is set in the Scottish Highlands in a place which is full of pine trees, and it's like a very dark claustrophobic community. And we're following a girl called Lauren who is about 9 years old or 10 years old, and her father Neil, who is an alcoholic and pretty hopeless, and he doesn't look after her properly at all. The neighbours kind of have to sort of step in a lot and help out to make sure Lauren is fed and clothed and everything. And Lauren's mum has disappeared and nobody knows what happened to her, including the family. And there's always kind of a finger of suspicion pointed towards Neil, because people are like, well, did he kill her? Like, where is she? And it's basically like, there's some stuff about like witchiness, which I like there's stuff about kind of tarot and spells and stuff, which is good. Lauren is also sort of a bit of an outcast in the community because of her mum, and she gets bullied at school, which was really horrible to read. And it's really just trying to find out like what happened to her mum. It wasn't very scary, and I felt like the ending was really rushed. I did enjoy reading it, but it's one that I kind of will forget really quickly and not that bothered, to be fair, so far. Right, the next book I read was one by one of our very own BookTube darlings, and this is The Flames of Albion by Jean Menzies. So Jean has a channel, Jean's Bookish Thoughts, which I'm sure that most people are aware of, and love Jean. And this is a book that she self-published last year. And this is the first in a series. I'm not sure how many there is going to be in the series. So this is a queer fantasy, and she describes it as hope punk, I think she describes it as. So in other words, it's a happy fantasy. It's not a fantasy where it's all grim and battles and everything like that. So this follows, our protagonist is called Adaria, and she has grown up in the university because she has no parents and the university took her in and raised her. So she's grown up around like books and studying, and she has always been happy there. And then one day there's a dragon's egg which has been in the university for years and years and years, and nobody thought that I was alive. And one day it starts to hatch, and when the dragons in this world start to hatch, they bond with somebody who's going to be like their, I don't know what the word is for it, but their person basically. And she the dragon is bonding to her basically, and so she ends up being like kind of a mother, I guess, to this dragon. And then it's also following, there's some stuff going on at the university which doesn't seem quite right, and another woman called Isla, who also has a dragon, comes to the university to kind of help Adaria, and they end up like falling in love with each other. And it's also about the two friends that Adaria has, Morag and Calder. So it's it's a really nice story. The only thing I would say is that it reads a bit like a middle grade story, and then there's sex. So then you know that it's not a middle grade story. But so it must be like YA. It definitely doesn't read like an adult book to me. The sex makes it, I guess, like YA, older YA. But otherwise, if you took the sex scenes out, it would kind of be like a middle grade book. So I was a bit confused who the target market was. But the story was engaging, and especially towards the end, the pace really picks up. There are cliffhangers at the end, because obviously Jean wants us to go on and read the next book, and I would certainly go on to read the next book. The next book I read was one I got from the library, which has now gone back, and it is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. So this is a short story collection. As I always say, I'm not a massive short story collection reader, but when I find a good one like this, then I love them. So this book contains, I think it's like probably about 10 stories. It's quite a small book, and they're all around black women. And how I describe the stories, they're all about different relationships. So between like friends, mothers and daughters, lovers, and they you feel like, this is what I said this before, imagine a character's general, life trajectory, and we've got a lens from above and we've zoomed in on this day or this part of their life and watched it happen, and then we've zoomed out again and gone over to someone else's life. So we just zoom in on a snapshot of their life, but we already feel, even though we don't know these characters, the author somehow convinces us that we do know them. We know what they're like, we know what their life's been like, we know different things about them, we know about their personalities. Even though we've only just met them, she already kind of manages to get those things into our head. So it's beautifully written, so cleverly written. I really enjoyed the stories. I think my favourite one was called How to Make Love to a Physicist, but they're all wonderful. So there's queer representation in here as well, and I just really loved this collection. I gave it 5 stars. It was brilliant. Then I had We Should All Be Feminist by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So this is a TEDx talk that she gave. It's a really small book. I read it in half an hour or something. And it's basically a talk about feminism, but because she grew up in Nigeria, it's kind of aimed at... I think it's sort of aimed at the Nigerian community and kind of explaining her version of feminism in line with her culture and stuff like that as well. So I found it a really enjoyable essay. I cannot remember loads about it now because it was very short, but I'm there for anything that she writes because she writes so well. The next book, we're back to the Women's Prize for Fiction again. So the next book I read was The Final Revival of Opal and andnev by Dawnie Walton. This I listened to on Audible, and Audible does a full cast narration, so every single part is read by a different actor, so it's like a play when you're listening to it. This is written in interviews, so we hear a bit from the narrator, who is called Sunny, and we know that her dad was murdered in a racially motivated attack in a concert that Opal and andnev were giving. And so she wants to go and find out about this story of Opal and andnev. And so she is kind of weaving her story in through the interviews. And then we're talking to Opal, andnev, Opal's family, people like record producers, managers, other musical acts and things like that, and hearing the story. And Opal is just the most phenomenal character. So Opal is a black woman with alopecia who has this amazing flair and style and performing capabilities. And she just grabs you and you want to see her and know more about her, and she feels so real. Her music feels so real. You want to go and Google images her, and you want to go on Spotify and listen to her records, but obviously she's not real. And she forms a partnership with Nev, who is a white British guy, and they do he's kind of like a singer-songwriter, and she's described as Afro punk, and they kind of make this amazing fusion. And one day when they're doing a showcase, this awful event happens, which is what the book focuses around. So the book where the journalist, Sunny, our main narrator, her dad gets murdered, and he was the drummer for Opal and andnev. So it all kind of leads up to that, and then the aftermath of that. And what I would say is I think I would have preferred if this wasn't interview style. Because clearly Dawnie Walton can write really well, and I really wanted this book to be just Opal's voice, because Opal's parts for me were the most interesting, the most alive, and I would have loved it if I could have just heard Opal's story, maybe with some other characters' perspectives on the odd chapter, but I wanted a book about Opal, and I found some of the bits about the music were too detailed for me, some of the bits about studio time and stuff like that and songwriting. I just found them a little bit boring, to be honest. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, but only because I wanted more of Opal and less of the smaller characters, and I'm not sure about the interview style. So obviously it's not my place to pick apart the author's choice of how to do this, but I just wanted Opal. I think it would make an amazing film. I think as a film it would be incredible. So I've had The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks out from the library since the first lockdown, because initially there in the UK there was no you didn't have to renew books, you could just have them out for however long, and then when you could start renewing again they used to limit it to 3 renews, but they haven't this time. So I've had this for blimmin' ages, and I'm really glad that I've now picked it up because I loved this book. So this is a non-fiction. James Rebanks is a sheep farmer, a shepherd who comes from the Lake District, and his generations of his family have all been doing shepherding in the same area. And it's basically about the relationships between him and his granddad and his dad and the sheep. And I learned loads. You may feel, well, I'm vegan, why am I reading a book about sheep farming? But I found it just incredible. Talking about, I loved the relationships. I really like where family relationships are discussed in books, and I really absolutely got a sense of James, his dad and his granddad, and the relationships between them all. And James absolutely adores his granddad growing up and all the things he teaches him, and how he can't wait until he can be as strong and as fast as his granddad, but then as his granddad ages he overtakes him and how strong and able he is, and the granddad has to wind down. And and then it's about how his dad is then the man of the farm, but then James feels like he wants to be a man of the farm, so there's kind of a bit of a clash on how to do things. And also there's so much talk in here about the old ways versus the new ways, and how they kind of view the Lake District as being all about farming, and other people in the Lake District, whether it's tourists or whether it's people who live in the more urbanised parts, are looking down their nose a bit at farmers and being you're just a farmer, what do you know? And so it's really interesting. Lots of things are discussed, as well as the absolute beauty of the seasons and the landscape, and how much he loves his sheep. And I learned a lot about sheep. Excuse me. I just found it fascinating and beautiful, and I really loved it, and I'd highly recommend it. The next one I read was one that Jen Campbell recommended, and this was called Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. Amazing title. And it's really, I loved this book. So this is quite a short book, and we're following our protagonist Gilda, and Gilda has health anxiety, and excuse me, she is set in the States, but she goes to A&E a lot because she thinks that she's dying, or she thinks there's something seriously wrong with her. And they all know her by name, and even the caretaker knows her by name. And she has anxiety and depression. And one time she finds a flyer that says at this church there's some therapy sessions you can go to. So she turns up to the church to go to one of these therapy sessions, and the priest at the church, he says, oh good, you must be here for the job interview. And she doesn't really have the courage to say no, I'm not here for the job interview, so she just goes along with it. And then she gets a job as the sort of the secretary of the church, but she's not Catholic, and she's also a lesbian, and so she has to kind of pretend that she's not a lesbian and that she is Catholic, even though she doesn't know what to do in the church and stuff. When they're doing the services and people are saying different things, she's kind of oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to be saying or anything. And she has a girlfriend who she's kind of just started seeing recently, and there's also a man who's interested in her from the church, but she can't really say that she's a lesbian, obviously. So she's trying to keep him at arm's length. And the other sort of main plot point is that her predecessor at work was 86, I think she was, and she died. And there's a nurse locally who's been killing off old people, and so they're trying to find out whether she died of natural causes or whether she died because this nurse killed her off. So it's written, it's very satirical, it's very darkly funny. And this really reminded me of two things. So one, it reminded me of My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Atessa Moshfegh. I think if you like the main character of that book, you will like Gilda. And the other thing it reminds me of is, as I said, Greta. It reminds me of a It reminds me of a Greta Gerwig film. I can just totally imagine her directing this film. And so if you kind of like those two types of things, I think you'll like this book. But it's looking at mental health. It's describing her mental health so well. But it is dark, but it's also darkly comical as well. And I just found it a really, really great book. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. And the last 2 are both middle grade books. So I listened to A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett on Audible. The reason I wanted to listen to this is because I love The Secret Garden, and I've never read anything else by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And Little Princess is set in Victorian England, and it follows Sarah Crewe, who has come back from India with her dad. Her dad is an officer in India in colonial times, and he's very wealthy. And it's just Sarah and her dad, and he wants to send her to England for schooling. And she's very bright, and she's very serious, and she's very kind. And she goes to this Miss Minchin's school, and Miss Minchin kind of really makes a fuss of her because she's like her star pupil. She wants to show her off because she's so wealthy and so beautifully dressed and so polite with lovely manners. And Sarah is some of the girls start being a bit jealous of Sarah because she's so popular and so nice to everyone. There's nothing you can find that's unlikable about her. And then a tragedy happens, and her father loses all his money, and Sarah has nothing and has to become what they call like a drudge, so basically a scullery maid at the school. And the fortunes are reversed, and it's about how she copes with adversity. And I thought it was a beautiful story. It was like, Sarah is such a lovely character. Like her standards, her morals, her kindness are all very inspiring, and her storytelling and imagination as well. And she really just makes the best of everything. And so I loved this, and I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was brilliant. And then the very last one I have is one I do actually have here. And this is El Deafo by Cece Bell. This was also recommended by Jen Campbell, and this book is a graphic novel, a middle grade graphic novel with a full colour palette. So I would say, like, my daughter's 8 and she is really enjoying it. So anyone around that age, I think they would really enjoy this. So this is the true story of Cece when she was little. She had meningitis when she was 4, and as a result of meningitis she became deaf, so she went from the hearing world to the non-hearing world. And this is about how she coped in, I think it was like the 1970s. Let's just see. I don't know if she actually says when it's set, but it's set, not in the modern day. And basically, so when she can hear, she has to wear like a hearing aid, which is like an earpiece in each ear with wires to a box around her neck. And then the teachers at school have to wear a microphone, which then transmits to the box she's wearing, and so she can hear what the teachers are saying. And she's very self-conscious of this to start off with, and she doesn't really know how people are going to react. And it's all about how other children react, how she goes on her journey of being a non-hearing person, and how she interacts with other children, her family, her views of herself, friendships is kind of the main theme of this book, and also how she finds ways of having advantages to her new system. So for instance, when the teachers go out of the room or they go to the toilet, they forget to take off their microphone, and all the other children find this really hilarious, that they can hear the teacher going for a wee, or they can hear the teacher in the staff room moaning about the other children and stuff. So there's ways which make her kind of popular with this as well. And it's just a beautiful insight into what it might be like to be a non-hearing person. And Cece Bell makes it very clear it's her opinion of it, it's her insight, it's not speaking for the whole deaf community. And different people view deafness in different ways. Some people view it as a disability, some people don't, some people view it as a strength. And it talks about differences within the deaf community as well. So I thought this was wonderful, really, really great, and I think a really good discussion as well. So me and Faye are buddy reading it, so I've finished, Faye's nearly finished, but it's been a really lovely buddy read. So, oh my goodness, that was a lot of books. If you've made it this far, like, really well done, because this is half an hour. It's a very big wrap up, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the books. If there's any that you've read, I'd love to hear your thoughts about them. I'd love to hear what you're reading now, or anything that you've read in the last month or so that you'd like to recommend. and what's your favourite out of the Women's Prize long list if you're reading them so far. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.